Well, hello. So glad we have this opportunity to continue being able to worship from a distance. We're fully understanding that there are some of you who, either because of being in a high-risk population or because of just a desire to be safe and conscientious, we fully understand that there are some of our number who are not going to be able to assemble with our number, and that's okay. That's understandable. We're in uncertain times. We have to do what seems best to us. We have to continue to be as safe as we can. And so there is going to be some awkwardness of that. There is going to be some uncomfortability with that. But we don't want to feel anybody to be pressured to be in the assembly if they don't think that that's the right thing for them to be doing right now. And so I want to continue making these available for at least the foreseeable future, so that if you feel more comfortable worshiping at home, if you still feel that's the smart decision for you, we want to make sure that option is available for you. And so I'll still be making videos for you to be able to use on Sundays if you are worshiping from home or with your family, to use for communion, to use for a sermon. So I'll still be planning on doing that for the foreseeable future. And so we want you to know that a decision to stay home to be safe doesn't change our love for you. It doesn't change our respect for your decision. We appreciate it. We appreciate you thinking about those things. This should be something that we are considering. It should be something that we're being safe with. And so if that's the right decision for where you're at, then that is absolutely the thing that you should be doing. And so we pray that everybody is following their conscience with all of this. And so with all that being said, obviously, perchance this week, if you are still isolated, if you are still going to be staying from home, there's probably going to be some frustration at that, because there are going to be the opportunity for some of us to be able to meet in person. But even for those of us who are going to be able to meet in person, it's not like we're going back to 100% normalcy. I mean, there's still going to be multiple services. There's still going to be some of that separation between the 9 a.m. and the 11 a.m. groups. And so that feeling of isolation, that feeling of loneliness, that feeling of separation from our brethren, that's something that we have all been struggling with, and it's something we're probably going to continue to struggle with in the foreseeable future. We're going to be dealing with these loneliness feelings, these feelings of isolation. And so one of the things that we've tried to emphasize in this time apart is how much it's important to turn those feelings over to God. We want to be honest with those feelings. We don't want to, tamp them all down and have this American ideal of, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you ignore your feelings and you just go forward. That's not the biblical way of dealing with things. That's not the biblical way of looking at things. And so we want to have a biblical approach to this. And when we look at, the Psalms as a really great example, we see that the biblical authors were honest about their emotions. They were honest about the frustrations they were having. They were honest about the struggles they were having with God. And so they would tell him about when they were frustrated, about when they had doubt, about when they were isolated and lonely and felt like even the Lord had abandoned them. The Lord wants that honesty, because that honesty, ultimately, it's a sign of trust in him. It's a sign that we feel comfortable enough with him, we trust him enough that we can kind of drop that mask we so often put on. And so one of the things that I want to do today is we're talking about this, is that I want to kind of explore one of the Psalms as I think a really good example of this emotional honesty with God, and particularly the idea of what we can use to turn to in our times of isolation. And you can probably already guess what the ultimate answer of that is. The most important thing we can do in a time of isolation is to turn to God. Because there's a lot of things that are outside of our control right now. There's a lot of things that we may not be able to handle right now. There are some things that we can't change. We can't change whether we're in an at-risk group. We can't change whether we're in a difficult situation where we might have to stay isolated. But what we can do is we can depend upon God. We can turn to the Lord and actively pursue him in these difficult times. And so what I want to do this morning, just very briefly, is to take a look at Psalm 139. This is one of the Psalms of David, and it's where David really takes comfort in the presence of the Lord, in the fact that no matter where he is, no matter how isolated or lonely or frustrated he is, God is there with him. And so we're going to read through this Psalm. It's a little bit long, about 24 verses, but we're going to read through this whole Psalm, and then we're going to take a look at it and see some of the applications we can draw out of this. So Psalm 139. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You understand my thought from afar. You scrutinize my path and my lying down, and are intimately acquainted with all my ways. Even before there is a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. You have enclosed me behind and before and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high. I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the dawn, if I dwell in the remotest part of the sea, even there your hand will lead me, and your right hand will lay hold of me. If I say, surely the darkness will overwhelm me, and the light around me will be night, even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night is as bright as the day. Darkness and light are alike to you. For you have formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God! How vast is the sum of them! If I should count them, they would outnumber the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God! Depart from me, therefore, men of bloodshed. For they speak against you wickedly, and your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with the utmost hatred. They have become my enemies. Search me, O my God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. There's a lot of really cool stuff to delve into with this psalm. And again, David is expressing a wide variety of emotions here, but all of it is ultimately linked to his dependence upon God. And so one of the very first things that he makes it clear is that God already knows all of this, is that God already is aware of what David's thinking. And one of the things that we might think of as we're looking at this is like, okay, well, if David thinks that God knows everything about him, why is David writing this psalm? Why is David taking the time to say something that God already knows? Why do we bother praying to God if God already knows what we need and what we want? And that's a fair question because we affirm that truth. We believe that God knows everything, that God is omniscient, is kind of the technical fancy term for it. We believe that God is aware of everything. We believe that God has the capacity to do all that is necessary. So why do we play a part in that? What's the importance of, little old me saying something to the Almighty? Why does that matter? Well, I think what David's point is that God wants us to talk with him. No, God doesn't need us to verbalize something. He's not a genie. He doesn't need us to make a wish in order for him to grant something. But he wants a relationship with us. God is defined by his love for us. He's defined by his love for all of creation. That's why he created was as an act of love. And even in his relationships within himself, with his relationships as the Father and the Son and the Spirit, he is a being of love and of relationship. And so he wants that from his people. And so David is able to say, even before there's a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. You have enclosed me behind and before and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's too high, I cannot attain to it. Remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about David. And yes, David is the man after God's own heart, and David did many good things. But David also did many bad things. Just like every other person in the world, David was a sinner. And in fact, we even have some of the worst of David's sins recorded. We get to read this terrible story of him with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah. And we see other examples of David not doing what he's supposed to be doing. We see him inaugurating the kingship of his son Solomon with a lot of bloodshed. And so God knows everything about David. We often look at what he says later on when he talks about you formed my inward parts. We look at that as a positive thing. We look at that as, God has known us from the very beginning, and that is a positive thing. But that also means that God knows we were sinful. God knows our weaknesses. He knew before creation that I was going to be imperfect. He knew that David was going to do terrible things, and that doesn't strip anything out of this context of of free will and what David is talking about of the actions being written in the book, that's not contradicting that it's our choice to make these things. But God's knowledge is so vast that he's aware of all these things. Remember, God's outside of time. And so God knew all of this was going to occur and yet still wanted it to happen because that's how much he prioritizes us. It's how much he prioritizes his relationship with us. Think about that fact for a moment, that God cares about having a relationship with you, not just with people, not just with humanity in the broad scope, but on an individual basis. He wants you. He wants your love. He wants your trust. He wants you to be his son or his daughter. That's an incredible thing when you think about the fact that God knows who we are. God knows we're not worth that. He knows that we haven't earned that by our actions, but it speaks to his great love that he wants us, even when he knows everything about us. He's seen our deepest, darkest, worst corners of our life that we keep hidden from everybody else. And he's seen us at our worst and still wants to redeem us and still wants to uplift us and still wants to love us in his special way. That's an incredible thing, and that should be an incredible comfort for us. And I think that's how David takes this, is that when he says, this knowledge is too great for me, he's making the point, I can't fully understand this. I can't wrap my mind around the depths and the riches of God's love. But it's going to comfort me in these dark times. David talks about it later on that he's facing enemies. And we know from David's life that there's a lot of times where David is on the run. He's on the run from Saul. He's on the run from his own son Absalom. He's going to be fighting constantly against the Ammonites and the Moabites and the Arameans and the Philistines. David had a lot of enemies. He had a lot of times where I'm sure he was very stressed and very frustrated. And yet he knew that the God of heaven, the King of the universe, knew him and was with him. And that was an enormous sense of comfort. And I think we should be able to take a similar sense of comfort from that the God of heaven knows who we are. He's seen us, and he still wants to be with us. And that's really what this next section talks about in 7 through 12. He goes through this kind of journey across the entire cosmos. And he says, from the heights of heaven to the very depths of Sheol, the most darkest, deepest place in the entire world, I can't hide from you anywhere. And that's not a negative. It's not like Jonah trying to run away from the Lord and trying to find the furthest corner away from Nineveh. This is saying there's nowhere where you can't be with me, Lord. There's no terrible situation I could get on, high or low, east or west, north or south. There's no part of the world where he says that your hand won't lead me and your right hand will lay hold of me. In other words, this is not a terrifying big brother thing that, there's nowhere you can escape the eyes of God. It's that God's hand is never too far away from you. That no matter what situation you are in, God is not incapable of helping you. And so God is not limited by a lack of knowledge. He's not limited by, I don't really know much about Andrew. I don't really know if I want him or not. He knows everything about you. And he still wants to be your God. And he still wants you to be his servant. So he's not limited by a lack of knowledge. And he's not limited by a lack of ability. He's not limited by saying, Andrew's he's so far away from me. If he'd get a little bit closer, I wish I could help him, but he's just too far away. And anywhere, any part of our life, any time in our life, any physical location, any spiritual location, God's not too far away from us to help us. He's not too far away for us to turn to him and say, I need your help. I need you. I need your saving grace. I need your power. I need your wisdom. And God will be there for us. And in this time of isolation, in this time where we're cut off from so many normalcies, we're cut off from so many things that we've grown to be accustomed to, I think having that sort of constant, that sort of solid bedrock foundation of a God who is always there, I don't think we can overstate the importance of that. How wonderful it is to have a God who knows us and who still is always there for us. And so he goes on to talk again about this idea of, you've formed my inward parts, you've known me. And then he says, how precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. How vast is the sum of them? If I should count them, they would outnumber the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. The end result of this, the end result of David's understanding of who God is, that God is not without, or that God is without limitation on his knowledge, he's without limitation on his ability. What that means and what that translates into is that David wants to be more like God. He wants to know God. He wants to draw closer to God. He wants to imitate the goodness of God. And so he recognizes that God's thoughts, God's word, God's scriptures, God's teaching, his law, his institutes, his precepts, they are precious because they show us the path to the Lord. They show us the path to be more like him, to lean more on his understanding. And so in these times of isolation, in these times of it could be great despair, we should recognize that now is the time for us to be drawing all the more closer to God. And we've all seen the news. We've all seen the world around us as people seem to be, they don't have sports to take comfort in. They don't necessarily have jobs or a normal workplace environment to take comfort in. And so everybody's trying to find something to take comfort in. And so many people are turning to the worst possible things. They're turning to an earthly government. They're turning to their own smarts. They're turning to the vices and the terrible things of this world. And none of those are going to get you through this. None of this are the things that are going to save you from yourself or from the terrible things of this world. We can't expect to place our trust in an earthly king or an earthly pleasure and think that that's what's going to get us through a time of despair and a time of isolation. The only thing that stands as that solid foundation is God, is his word, his precepts. And so that's why when David is struggling, when he is facing these enemies, he's praying to God. He says that you would slay the wicked one, Lord, that, I want your justice. I don't want to take it for myself. I don't want to be the tool of vengeance. I want you to do justice because you do justice better than I do justice. Your justice is perfect. Your wrath is perfect. Your righteousness is perfect. And so he leans upon the Lord in this time of difficulty. And that's why he closes out the psalm and he says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way." And so he concludes, he's already said he knows that the Lord can do this. He knows that the Lord is righteous, that the Lord is perfect in his knowledge. And he says, "Lord, test me, search me, correct me." That's the most important thing I think about this, is that David doesn't just acknowledge that the Lord is knowledgeable, that the Lord is near to him. He says, "Lord, I want you to change me. I want you to do the things that are required to make me more like you." And so for David, the key to overcoming isolation, the key to overcoming this difficulty with his enemies is trust in the Lord and adherence to the Lord. Not just kind of the intellectual recognition of who God is, but the willingness to accept what God has said and act upon that. To let God change us and to let God redirect our paths if they're not the right one. And so as we are struggling through this time of isolation, as we are dealing with, 2.5 months now really, of all of this frustrating time period, I hope it's become more clear than ever that the only thing that's going to endure, the only thing that's going to get us through this time period is God, is trust in him, is usage of his word, is reliance upon him. Because he is the only one that has perfect knowledge and perfect ability to act on that knowledge. And so my hope is that our prayer is the same prayers as David. That our prayer would be, "Lord, search us. Use your abilities, use your knowledge, use your ways. We want you to know us. We don't want to hide from you. We don't want to try to scurry away from you. We want you to search us. We want you to see if there's wrongness in us. We want you to see if there's things that need correcting, and we want you to correct them, Lord. So that when we emerge from this time of trial, we're made all the better for it." It's that idea of the refining fire, of taking this precious metal and burning off all the dross, getting rid of all of the impurities, so that you're left with that precious metal, that final beautiful product. That's what can be used. That's what God is looking for. And so that's what I hope we're using this time of isolation for, is earnest searching for the Lord, is earnest prayers that he would be the one who would search us and help us through this time period. Because there's nothing else that's going to do the job. There's no other source that's going to lead us through this difficult time. I hope this gives you some things to think about. I hope it gives you some things to pray about. It's always so beneficial, at least for me personally, to go through a psalm like this, to have somebody who, is both, one, clearly an accomplished writer, but someone who's guided by the Holy Spirit to give us these words, to have preserved these words so that we can agree with them, that we can begin to think in these ways, that we can model our prayers after the Psalms, that we can see what's most important for us to see. And so I pray that we can use this time of isolation, we can use this time of trial, ultimately and truly to the glory of God above anything else. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch these things. Again, I'm so encouraged by everyone's desire to worship, their zeal to worship, even in this difficult situation. And we're all going to keep working through this. We're all going to keep doing the best we can and making these small steps, and hopefully soon the Lord will bless us with the ability to meet unhindered, completely together, and this virus will be nothing but a distant memory of the past. Thank you so much for tuning in. God bless you all. We love you. We can't wait to see you again. Thank you so much.